Well, let me go ahead and get us started. We've got 48 participants. That's a great number. So let me get my script here and we'll get going. Thanks, folks, for being with us. I really appreciate it, your time. I know you're very busy, lots going on these days. It's a sort of a crazy, surreal time. But I just want to welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm Palmer Holt. I'm founder and CEO of In Christ Communications. We're a full spectrum communications agency based outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. We work with a broad array of faith-based clients, a lot of ministries, Christian businesses, churches, schools, rescue missions, crisis pregnancy centers. We do everything from branding to marketing to advertising, PR, social, digital. We do a lot of crisis communications work. I handled the crisis PR for the Ebola crisis for the missions agency SIM several summers ago. You all may remember it was a media tsunami. It went on for about 4 months. And it really showed us that a lot of organizations weren't prepared for a crisis, especially on the crisis communication side. But by the time that project was over, 4 months, I think we got more than 30,000 positive media hits around the world. And if you had to buy that time, buy that space, the equivalent ad value was like $300 million of brand awareness. I know you don't want to profit from a crisis, but that just shows you how big a crisis can be and how much media interest it can generate and what that's worth. So I'm also part of an organization of professional crisis managers, security experts for major missions agencies from around the world that we meet twice a year. And we just started a crisis communications committee that I'm the chairman of. So, I've sort of become a Johnny Appleseed for getting Christian organizations, churches, businesses, prepared for crisis, and found out that, there's a lot of people that it's something that, people put off, don't plan for, but it can really hurt you if you're not prepared. So the purpose of this call and the purpose of this group, this gathering, is basically in response to the Ebola crisis, the coronavirus crisis. It's created a lot of confusion. There's a lot of misinformation. The speed and the sense of urgency that it's happened so rapidly is just throwing everybody for a loop. And so it's really important to be organized and to have sort of a clear communication strategies and messaging at this time, and to be able to execute that. So we felt like it's really important for folks to connect and collaborate together on the communications front, whether you're a communications director, a development person, a marketing person, and an executive of some type. We just need to get together and collaborate and cooperate and really just to walk with each other through this and share best practices and ideas going forward from a faith-based perspective. You can do all this from a worldly perspective if you want to. A lot of the principles still apply, but there's nothing beats the family of God, the body of Christ coming together in times of a crisis, because we have nuances and aspects to what we do that the world doesn't have. So let me just do this. Let me open this with a prayer real quick for our time together, and then we'll jump right in. So Lord, we just commit this time to you, commit this organization to you, this group to you, these folks to you. Lord, the good news is you're on the throne and we're not. You're in charge, and you have your plans. You're not surprised by this. So Lord, we just want to abide in Christ and to sync up with you and to walk with you and have you walk with us and through us in this time, Lord. The steps that we need to take and the things that we need to do. You said that we have the mind of Christ, and we just ask that we be able to apprehend that as your kingdom continues to come, and that you would be glorified in everything we do. So we just thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. So what we've done, we're calling this group Crisis Connect, and it's an online forum, basically to discuss the communications issues in the midst of this coronavirus outbreak and beyond. Again, we want to connect, we want to collaborate, and we want to share information quickly and nimbly in real time if possible. So while we want to have a weekly call on this, but most of the communication will take place on either a Facebook group that you have access to or a LinkedIn group that you have access to. So really encourage you to, whatever place you want to engage, that you press one of those buttons, click on one of those buttons and get into the group. And really the best things that are going to come out of this are what people share from their own experiences and best practices and obstacles and ways to overcome those, and pray for one another. But so most of what the collaboration will take place in these groups on Facebook and on LinkedIn. But then we want to try to have a call once a week to where we sort of hit the highlights of what we see going on, share the latest information, trends, ideas, and give folks a chance to interact, through video. A few ground rules for the food groups. It's always the kindness, courteous is the best way to go. We don't want to we're not doctors. We don't want to speculate about what medically that this all means. We don't want to be critical of other people's policies. We want to, people have their own ideas about how to do things, and we don't want to try to correct or steer people unnecessarily in these groups. Of course, we want to refrain from political commentary, which is an easy place to go these days with the politically charged atmosphere that's going on. But these groups, we don't really want to get into politics at all. Of course, we don't want to have spam, and we want to be able to, of course, take away information from these groups, but we also want to bring information. So we want to encourage people to share as much as possible. So, but again, we will try to have a weekly video conference call like this at the same time every Monday, 2 p.m. Eastern. So if you mark your calendars, and also, share with folks these links, this call, because we want to, bring in more and more people to be able to take part in the conversation. So just quickly, and I'll quit talking in just a minute, but just the latest news of what's going on. We're seeing in the news more social distancing, whole cities, states, sort of locking down. We don't know how long that's going to be. Testing is going up. Rates of infection are going to go up because there's more testing. A lot of logistical things going on in the background, making hospital beds available, ventilators, there are a lot of public-private partnerships. They're testing some treatment options that have promise. Of course, this vaccine research is going on in the background, and you've got what's going on in Congress and trying to figure out how to put something together that can work for both without creating some sort of a deadlock politically. So in terms of trends that we're seeing right now in terms of communications, we're trying to figure out what are the trends, what are the key pain points or issues that people are dealing with and solutions to those, and what's sort of likely ahead. Again, the kinds of ministries that would be interested in this kind of thing would be churches, domestic ministries, international ministries, schools, rescue missions, crisis pregnancy centers, those kinds of folks. And the kind of areas that these organizations are deal with right now, sort of essential essential services like care, whether it's spiritual care or emotional or health, physical care, logistical things. Churches have to deal with worship services, their gatherings, their conferences, their small groups. Schools have classes. The giving is a big issue at this time, and communicating about that, and maintaining essential ministry services that need to go on in the midst. Technology can solve a lot of these things, or come in and help accomplish a lot of things, but there's certain times where there's a ministry involved that still has a physical aspect to it. Still, they need to find ways to get those kinds of things done that a lot of organizations are dealing with. So in terms of the kinds of technologies we see that people are applying, of course, there's the good old-fashioned phone, text, emails. People, web streaming is huge for services, video teleconferencing, social media, digital, but also try to, again, like I was saying, need to try to find safe ways to provide services that still have a physical component. So I think we're sort of like 10 days into this, maybe almost 2 weeks, and we've seen a lot of ministries, churches and ministries go through what I call sort of a triage phase. Stop the bleeding. What do we do now, short term? And I think everyone was caught by surprise about this. There are organizations out there that sort of already use a lot of high technology platforms for the work that they do, and those folks are using those more than ever, and they're sort of adding to them, building to them. Other organizations may be low-tech organizations or no-tech organizations, and they're sort of having to start from scratch and try to find, how do we have a church service through Facebook? How do we set up a Zoom conference call? Just sort of start from scratch in terms of technology. And most of this is built around, providing essential services that the organizations need to provide. I think longer term, they'll sort of flesh out and find some ways, either technology wise or some other kinds of arrangements to do non-essential services. But I think most organizations have come through the sort of the crisis triage, stop the bleeding phase of all this, and things are going to settle down a little bit in terms of having gotten through that first wave and sort of looking at what does the next week or two look like. So, in terms of pain points and challenges, of course, there's the physical and the health safety aspect of all this, the fear, the uncertainty, the confusion. A lot of organizations really don't have crisis communications teams in place, or they don't have even crisis management teams in place, of which crisis communications is a subset. So, no crisis communications teams. Most of them don't have plans. Most of them don't have resources prepared. So people have had to move very quickly, and they've have limited personnel, and they have limited budgets. And of course, giving is going to be a big issue in all this for every organization, not only in terms of means to give, ways to give, but just desire to give or capability of giving because of what's happening to the economy is a big deal. But there's been a lot of unclear, uncoordinated messaging as happens at the beginning of any crisis. But I feel like most people have probably found a rhythm or a groove, at least for now. And now trying to figure out what's going to happen next. So in terms of solutions, short term, there's no substitute for trust in God. In the Ebola crisis with SIM, we figured out early on we were going to let it be God's story. We're going to try to spin it with public relations, PR. We really needed to trust God. And then prayer is, it sounds like simple, but prayer is a big deal in all this, and it makes a difference. I've been in organizations that were praying and those that weren't, and you can tell that when there's praying going on in the background, it really helps. So, short-term solutions, having that triage team and plan in place, getting your messaging really clear and crystallized is important, and then executing your strategy and your messaging in a coordinated fashion. Always updating and revising it. Taking the temperature, monitoring how things are going, but always updating and revising your plans. We have a plan, a product is called SAFE. It stands for study, assess, the audience, frame, and then execute. So that's sort of a model, a crisis communications model product that you might want to remember that acronym, SAFE, and use that in your own organizations. In terms of long-term solutions, most folks probably need a formal crisis communications team for the future, a plan in place, maybe some media training. You need to understand, what your branding is all about, what your messaging is on a good day that you want to have come through. Understand sort of the stakeholder universe. Who are all the constituencies or audiences that you need to communicate with on a regular basis? Take them into account. And what are the communications channels that you use on a regular basis to communicate to them through? And then within those communications, what are the products or we call them deliverables, or the vehicles that these messages ride on? You need to take an inventory of all that and then formulate a plan to take advantage of all that. So like I talked about, the trends we're seeing with technology, I've already mentioned some of the important things you can do. That whole trust, pray, team, message crystallization, execution, revision is the way to go. And in terms of communications on the horizon that people need to think about, I'm a little concerned about the fact that after a week or two of social distancing and people staying in their homes, the pressure is going to start to build that people, cabin fever is for real, and I don't know how long America can stay locked down. So I think the next phase is going to be, it's going to be interesting to see what Congress does too, and how much progress is made on the public healthcare front. But I think about the fact that if this thing is protracted and the social distancing has to stay in place for more than 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you're going to start to see a lot of frustration out there, and a lot of emotions are going to start to surface that you're going to have to help people. We all need to trust God first, trust the science, and our government second. But we need to try to help our constituents walk through this and know that they're going through all kinds of not only spiritual stress, but psychological stress, financial stress, logistical challenges. So the longer this goes, the more frustrated the world's going to get. So Diane, Christina, any other questions that come up in your mind that might be top of mind for folks at this point?
No, I think these are all good. I think that one of the things that we really need to think about is where our target markets are coming from. We know the landscape has changed dramatically, and so has the emotional content. People are dealing with fear, financial insecurity, collective benevolence. People want to be out there blessing with good messages, good news. And even there's a need for escape from all of the concerns and fear and negative emotions surrounding the coronavirus. One of the questions that was just posed was, when do we move away from the term COVID? That is fraught with a lot of negative emotion on one hand. On the other hand, it's something that people really recognize. And I think one of the things that this is going to get back to is each organization developing their own new message strategy. We need to evolve our message strategies in light of what's happened and lay the lens of Christ over everything that we're dealing with, as well as the lens of our particular ministry. So when we talk about using new language, that's something that we'll want to carefully evaluate for all of our clients within all of our teams, and bring that back to our own mission strategy. But there is familiarity with the COVID, so there's always going to be the problem solution format.
Right. And sorry I didn't do this at the outset. That was Diane Lonsdale. She's the president of In-Christ Communications. Her background is with large, big-time ad agencies out of Chicago and Los Angeles. She's a branding, marketing, integrated communications architect for us. When clients come in we help figure out who they are, what they need, and develop an integrated strategy where we have all kinds of different things working together in a strategic, comprehensive way. And Diane is the architect for that kind of research and that kind of planning. Also, her daughter also works for us, Christine Lonsdale. She's our social media expert, and she's on here in case some questions come up that she is an expert in. So there's a chat. What we want to do right now is open this up to Q&A, questions and answers. There's a chat box at the bottom of your screen somewhere.
So we actually already do have 2 questions in, Palmer. So
yeah,
I can read
right.
that.
Yeah, I'm getting ready. I'll jump on those just a second. But I just invite you to go to the Q&A section and type in a question, and we'll get to it. So the first question, I think Dan sort of indirectly answered this. It talked about a group of executive pastors. The one trend they're seeing is they're removing the phrase COVID-19 from their website for what seems like intent to remove something fearful. This organization currently has an update on their website. The question is, do you feel, is it wise to leave the COVID language at this point or not? And if to remove it, why? So at this point, I don't see it, this is my opinion, I don't see that language being any more fearful than it's already been. It's going to become less so over time, but it is what it is. It's this is a coronavirus outbreak, and to try to sanitize that or wordsmith something away from it to where it might have less fear, I don't think is a big deal. It is what it is, and I don't think it's any problem with continuing to say it. But just don't. If you do decide not to use it, don't try to sashay your way through some other kind of word that makes it look silly, that you're trying to avoid something that's obviously what it is. So that's the first question. The next question I've got, it says, the longer the crisis goes on, more likely we will experience significant financial disruptions. What are some solid strategies to help communicate with our donor base? I thought about this a lot, and I wrote an opinion piece on this, and it was in Charisma magazine, or at least on their website last week. Because what's going to happen is, in times of financial uncertainty, people are going to have pause about their finances, and so they're going to put off decisions until they know what's going to happen or feel like they can get back to what they were doing. And so I'm telling folks that times like this is when the darkness gets darker, our lights get brighter and shine more brightly, and people are more receptive to the gospel than ever. And now is the time to sort of press into ministry if you can, where you can, because the soil is more prepared than ever for receptivity to the gospel. So it's really important to help communicate that to if you're a church, to your members, if you're a ministry, to your donors, whether they're major donors or rank and file donors. But also find some ways to make it easy for them to give, or easier through e-giving. The mail still works and checks still get deposited. So I'd really encourage you to help your stakeholders, your audiences understand why what you're doing is important now, not just in the future. Because a lot of people think that if you're doing something down the road, that can wait. But what are you doing now, especially that's relevant, that is worthy of them investing their time and their prayers and their volunteerism toward? So that's how I answer that. And Diane and Christine, feel free to chime in to come behind me on some of these answers if you have.
So we have a question here about social media, so I'll go ahead and take this one from
Okay.
Vicky. How much do we talk about virus-related news information on social media versus normal news to give people a break from the heaviness? So this is something I've seen going around in a lot of social media circles recently. It's something that a lot of people are asking. In fact, Sprout Social Media, which is the leading social media software, they actually just launched a global pause button in an effort to help organizations pause their current messaging if you think that it's not related to coronavirus or it might appear dense to your audience. So something that I would recommend is maybe looking at the posts that you have planned or that you have scheduled and see if there's any way that they relate to the coronavirus epidemic. Do they offer people some hope, maybe a solution, some distraction? If there is that angle, then I would go ahead and post them. But I would make sure that your content doesn't appear as though it's totally removed from the coronavirus crisis, because that is top of mind for everyone right now.
Okay, thank you. I got another question related to finances. It says, when communicating with ministry donors, are there essential pieces of information we need to include? You know, donors are going to want to know the sense of urgency for what you're planning on doing, first and foremost, and have that be clear. Again, the closer it can be related to what's going on right now in the world related to the virus, the better. But they're going to want to know what are the features and benefits of what you're doing, what the costs are, what you see as a return, you know, on the work. So, and whatever you do, you want it to be reflected in the pieces, your information, whether it's on your website, in your social media, in your direct response, if you have that, or in your communications with major donors. So they just need to have the facts and understand why this is important now, if possible. If not now, then why is it important? Period. And why is now a good time? Because again, the world is, you know, wringing their hands and looking to the heavens for answers and looking to us for answers. And so there won't, a time like this is a time to kind of like the stock market. If you have cash, buy stock now, because there are deals out there. In kingdom terms, this is a great time to invest in the kingdom. That's what I tell them. Next question says, how did you address the health issues in your organization? Did you address the health issues in your organization in a country with little healthcare infrastructure and a culture filled with widespread superstition and miscommunications? I think most organizations on the international front, you know, spoke into the lives of their members and staffs about what they could do, number one, to protect themselves. But I think this, you know, when you're in a country, in a culture where there's superstition, that's, you know, on a good day, that's just the way it is. I mean, in Africa, during the Ebola crisis, they had to, you know, deal with a lot of superstition in the culture. They would, before they buried somebody, they would wash the bodies, and that was the time when the viral load on a body was the highest. You know, but that was their practice, and it was a hard thing to overcome. And it's more up to the government, really, to communicate that kind of thing in those situations. I mean, you can speak your truth to the culture, but culture is a hard thing to overcome. And usually the best way to do that is to let their own or their culture deal with it. Next question, are there any best practices for working with local media to communicate our ability, even if it's digital, to conduct outreach ministry to keep our communities together? I think the media is looking for creative ways that organizations are continuing to do outreach in the midst of a crisis like this. Or, you know, there are even new, we'll call them opportunities, there are even new avenues for ministry that this kind of crisis creates. And you may find yourself coming across some idea to conduct some sort of felt need ministry that you were not doing before, but now is a smart thing to do, or a God idea. So the best way to communicate with local media is, number one, know who they are and who to get to these organizations. And we subscribe to a media contact database where we can find any reporter at any media outlet in the country and get it right into their inbox. But a press release is probably the best way to do that. Or find out what the reporters and their Twitter handles, and follow them and see if you can transmit your ideas to them through Twitter and social media.
Can I add something to that, Palmer?
Yeah, please do.
One thing about the whole idea of local community outreach, we're seeing, and we have been seeing for years now, that local is very important to people. People want to be impacting their local communities. And the other thing is that we see with this crisis that's upon us, many different segments of people are emerging. So we talk a lot about seniors being vulnerable, but what are the particular ministry needs for seniors, and how can we minister to them specifically through communications and through local outreach? The unemployed, new moms, everybody's looking to sort of come together as a community. So there's quite a lot of content that we can be talking about, particularly if your church is addressing that in an important way.
Right. Next question is, should we try to avoid media coverage right now, or should we actually try to engage the media proactively? I think if you don't want to waste their time, you want to have meat that they can use, but I'd say by all means reach out to the local media. If you've got some sort of a story that's got a strong news hook to it, that they might be interested, because they're the news media is a 24/7 animal that's got a voracious appetite for content and needs to be fed all day, every day. And so they're looking for, stories with good angles to them. So I would encourage you to reach out, especially if you've got a good story, and, put together a quick news release or some sort of a news brief or a media advisory, making them aware of it. And again, you just need to find out who the media representatives are in your area, and we can help you find those contacts if you need them. Well, this next question is sort of related. Should we try to avoid media coverage right now, or should we actually try to engage the media proactively? Again, you don't want to go into hiding or to shut down unnecessarily in a crisis situation, especially if it's a real crisis. You want to have a plan to be able to engage the news media and to be as transparent as possible. But if you've got good news to tell, tell it. And think about, when you think about a news story, think about pictures. Television, if you can't get something on video in the television world, it's hard to get reported on. So think about visuals when you have a story to tell, or people that are good to interview, because television is what people are going to gravitate toward most right now. So let's see if we have any other questions.
There's a question here about, our president wants to send a video to our donors. Any advice? I think that's an awesome idea. We need to, as I said before, really need to appeal to the emotional concerns and connections that we can make with people, and videos is an amazing way to do that. So I think that we're seeing a lot of use of video in long and short formats, and I think that's a fantastic idea.
I would even add here, Jim, I saw a lot of people have actually been going live on Facebook and Instagram with their leaders as the face of the video. And I've seen that perform really well. The community seems to be resonating with it. So that could be a really solid option for your video, and also a really low cost option, which is super, super important for nonprofit organizations, of course.
Christine, maybe you could address what some of the best uses of social media technology are right now for people, especially related maybe to Facebook and Twitter, some strategies or tactics.
Yeah, so definitely the Facebook and Instagram live option that I just mentioned, that's really timely right now, because your leader or someone in your communications department, anyone really can go onto Instagram and onto Facebook and talk directly to your constituents, which is an absolute amazing quality of technology. And you can communicate with those people directly, just how we are now, via the chat box. And you can answer questions that they might have, or provide some kind of guidance to your constituency. So I think that's a really interesting tactic. And then of course you can continue to post on social media as you normally would. Just make sure that your content is somehow directed towards the coronavirus, or offering people some kind of a solution, hope that I mentioned earlier. I think it's really important right now that the content, because we're just absolutely in the peak of this crisis, I think it's really important that content is somehow related to coronavirus. I don't think business as usual is the way to go right now.
Okay.
Can I add something to the social media thing?
Sure.
Question. You know, when we think about different pillars, we talk about education, inspiration, encouragement is a huge piece here, and so is this element of escape. And one of the things that I've seen people use is certainly prayer requests and prayer support. The whole prayer chat is a huge use of both social media and digital media on websites and various areas of a church's or an organization's website. So that's a really, and I've even seen sort of this escape entertainment where people are sharing worship songs and various stories and testimonies being used as well. So I think there's many different ways that we can use social media, as Christine alluded to a little bit earlier as well.
Got a couple questions. How do you handle internal communications during a crisis, especially at a time like now when ministry staffs might be anxious? Again, you need to take into account the whole universe of stakeholders that you need to communicate with on a regular basis. If you're, say you're an international missions agency, you've got your board, you've got members, you've got staff, you've got partners, you've got churches, you know, you've got donors in the various segments. So, but internally with staff, with members, and board members, you know, and you need to communicate sort of the same messages to all those groups to some degree at the same time, the same way. But it's really important to take care of your core first. I believe in what's called the Acts 1:8 communications philosophy. You know, you'll be my disciples in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the world. Your Jerusalem is your staff and your members and your board people that do the work that co-labor with you. Then the concentric circles out are people that you know donate to the work or partner with you. And you know, you go out further, they're less engaged in the work, but it's really key to make sure that if you don't take care of Jerusalem, you can forget about Judea and Samaria, because it'll fall apart from the inside out. So it's really important to take care of your internal audiences first, and make sure the organization walks together, because they can hurt you if they're not together, not because they want to, because social media could get out of hand. Factions could emerge in your organization. So it's really important to try to keep people together, not for control, but just in a healthy organization where you're functioning as a one body and with healthy, you know, pieces to it. So internal audiences are really important. And feel free, Diana, Christine, if you want to add on to that. If not, I'll go on to the next question. What kind of person makes the best spokesperson? In terms of speaking either to within the organization or primarily to the news media. So in terms of the news media, you want either your CEO doing it or your COO, someone who has a great grasp of the organization and the mission, someone who's a good communicator, and most of these people that rise to these levels have to be these things. But somebody who's also, calm in the midst of a crisis and comes across that way, and someone who's not intimidated by the news media. We conduct what we call adversarial media training for spokespersons. We do a lot of crisis work, and people can get thrown in front of a camera and not having had that kind of experience. And there's no net when it's live television. So, and even the best communicators from a pulpit on Sunday have no idea what it's like to be, hot lights and hard questions from an adversarial media news crew that jumps you in the parking lot. So you want somebody who's can handle themselves under pressure, but also try to find some media training for them if you can. In your local markets, there are probably some professionals out there that can help you. We do it either in person or through video, but you want a person who's also that comes across with sincerity, and you want to be as transparent as possible. You don't want somebody up there that's scared of saying the wrong thing. You want somebody that is a friendly, approachable, agreeable, but also somebody you want in charge in the middle of a crisis. Let's see if there are any other questions coming up. If not, let's see. Hang on one second. I got one more question. Diane, do you want to mention anything about branding or messaging in the midst of a crisis like this? Most organizations sort of have their brand already. They have their key messaging. What about, looking at that on a good day and then filtering present day messages related to the crisis through that brand?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of messaging that we can plan for, and there's a lot of messaging that we can't plan for, and we have to leave room in our message maps for both, I think. And when we develop messaging strategies here, we start out with an understanding of the landscape. And we know that this landscape has changed dramatically, but our ministries and our churches are the organizations that they're evolving, but they're still the organizations that they always were. So it's this combination of the new messaging that needs to address the new needs, and the pillars and the messages that we've had as organizations going forward. So we see that we need to just look through and determine how that balance of emphasis may change as our messaging goes forward.
All right. Also, I got one more question. Someone was asking about having the skill sets internally on a communications team to be able to address a time like this and to get the work done that needs to be done, and maybe they don't have those people. So on a short-term basis, you might consider outsourcing some of your work. There's a site out there on the internet. It's called Upwork, UPWORK.com, and you can go on there and find a social media person if you need one, a graphic artist if you need one, a videographer if you need one, writers if you need writers, and they're available. They're freelancers. They're available on a part-time basis. They're of differing rates. Most of the work these days can be done virtually. So if you find yourself in a place where you don't have the skills in-house to do the things that you feel like you need to do in the communications realm, there are ways to scale up quickly by adding freelancers. We do this kind of work ourselves, but I'm giving you a free tip here. You can go find people to help you fill these gaps, on a short-term basis, and pay them when they work and don't pay them when they don't. So it's something that's a resource that you might want to take advantage of. Upwork.com. So let me go. We got a few more minutes left, so let me just sort of wrap up. First of all, again, I just want to thank you all for taking the time on short notice to come to this today. I really encourage you to sign up for either the Facebook group or the LinkedIn group. Go on there and share. We'll be putting information in those groups in a timely fashion to help grease the skids and create some fodder for discussion and some ideas that you can use. But also, to think about other people in your organizations or in your network of relationships in your ministry niche worlds to join us, because it's there's a lot of I wish I could open the mic up to everybody here, because I'm sure that a lot of people have some things that they can share that would be profitable to the people on this call. But do that in these groups, and we're going to be monitoring them, and we'll speak into the flow of the conversations. But ask questions of each other, share ideas and best practices with each other, and it's because this is a very dynamic situation, and it's going to change. Every day it's going to change. So we'll try to keep it current and refreshed from our side, but nothing can take the place of people talking in community, and a community coming around an issue. So we're going to have another call this time next week. It'll be on Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Feel free to contact us offline with any kind of questions or needs that you might have. We'll follow this call up with a sort of a summary email to everyone who's on this call. And let me see if there's any other questions. I think I just got one more. Hang on a second. Let's see.
I see two more. One is, would you consider bringing in panelists from the field to share their ideas?
Absolutely. We've already been talking about this. We've got several experts, subject matter experts, we call them SMEs, in the various ministry niches, whether it's churches or rescue missions or the retirement world, community, Christian schools. So yeah, I think what we might do, that's a good idea. And please send us your ideas about what you would like to see on this call as well. But that's a great idea. We have already thought about that. Maybe next week we'll have a guest, on the call that can talk about their world, whether it's churches or one of the ministry niches that are represented in this call. So yeah, that's a great idea, and we plan on doing that. So send us your suggestions and send us your questions, that you want answered. Do it through the working groups on Facebook and LinkedIn, so that we can, next call, we'll be even more on point with things that matter specifically to you. Diana said there's one more question.
There is one more. It says, it's inevitable that at some time, all of us will hear that someone in our organization has succumbed to COVID-19. What are your recommendations to prepare for sharing news of the death of leaders and staff, such as gathering obituary content in advance? I work for a missions organization, and all of our field staff complete their obits before they leave the U.S.
Wow.
Something I know we've.
No, that's yeah. In fact, you might want to anticipate what are the various scenarios that could happen that are not good, that are negative in the midst of this crisis, that being one of them. Get a short list of what scenarios to anticipate, and then think about if something one of those things that would happen, what would you say about that? And draft sort of a straw man statement that you would give to the news media about this, and some talking points underneath it, and then supporting background information about the context of everything. So whatever whatever you can anticipate that might happen that could hurt you, think about it in advance. Think about having a draft statement done that you would use with the news media and as a foundation for for communications through every other medium, whether it's social or digital or to donor. Those straw man statements could get you 80 to 90% of what you would need to communicate well in a crisis situation. You can prepare ahead of time in a templatized fashion. So think about the scenarios, put together some statements, think about some questions that you might get from the news media, and then prepare those materials in advance. So yeah, good. Not a great question we want to entertain, but a realistic one. So trying to think, Diane, Christine, anything else that you guys would like to add before we sign off here?
No, just to reiterate that we'll be populating our Facebook and LinkedIn pages with content. We'll be sort of going through all of the questions that were answered to try to understand what some of the most important areas for us to be addressing in a little bit more detail will be going forward. We'll be developing sort of a content cadence for our weekly meetings as we go forward as well. So we'll put more planning into it. So I just like to reiterate, as Palmer did, that if you have questions, key areas that you would love to see addressed or that you're struggling with, please reach back out to us and let us know those.
So just one final thought, or a couple of final thoughts. What we want to concentrate on is on helping people communicate the things that they need to communicate, just as a part of doing ministry on a daily basis now in this environment. But then also, I think it's really important, and maybe we might even have somebody next time on the call for this to talk about, the economic outlook and communicating with donors, because that's a huge pain point. It could be a huge pain point for everybody in terms of whether you're a church or you're a parachurch organization or some sort of ministries are going to be facing people that are in an short-term economic hardship. So how do we make the most out of that, or how do we deal with that? I think because that's everybody's mind, like, how are we going to pay the bills? How are we going to do ministry when the economy is going to be in shock, and donations are the last thing to come back around, or contributions. So I'm thinking maybe next time that might be have somebody on who can really talk about what this looks like from the giving point of view, because it's on the back of everybody's mind. Well, not it's no longer on the back of people's mind. It's getting in the forefront of people's minds because it's happened so fast. So anyhow, all right. Well, listen. Thanks for the time and your attention, and we want to hear from you in the groups, and we'll be communicating along the way. But hope to see you 2:00 Eastern next Monday. So thanks and many blessings to you. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.